Mayday, Mayday, this is Viper 2-3, they're not aircraft. I repeat, they're not aircraft.
The voice clawed through the radio static like a dying animal, desperate, breathless, fragmented by panic. Then, silence. No explosion. No distress beacon. Just a blank radar screen where a $70 million jet and one of the Air Force's most experienced pilots had been 30 seconds prior. Viper 2-3 was gone. They called him Captain Elias Rourke. 27 confirmed missions. Flawless record. Respected, even envied. And just like that, his name was erased. No obituary. No closed casket. No folded flag. His wingman, Lieutenant Baron, filed the incident report, but when he returned to base, command had already rewritten it. In the official version, there was no wingman. There was no mission. And there never was a Captain Elias Rourke. Rourke's wife, a nurse at Elmendorf, was told her husband had been transferred. When she asked for forwarding information, the military chaplain simply said, "He's where he needs to be." She never heard another word. She never even got his belongings. Not his tags. Not his watch. Not even his wedding band. The house they lived in was cleared within 48 hours, as if he'd never walked through its front door. As if he never existed. But what unsettled Lieutenant Baron the most wasn't the vanishing, it was what Rourke saw. He'd never heard him sound like that. The man who could fly nap of the earth in blackout conditions was screaming like a cornered child. "They're not aircraft." Over and over. "They're not aircraft." Baron had barely caught a glimpse, but there was something on the HUD, a formation above them, impossible altitude, no heat signature, no transponder. Just shapes. Geometric. Angular. Moving without inertia, like they were skipping frames of reality itself. When Baron started asking questions, he was pulled from flight duty. Drug tested. Evaluated. Twice. Then assigned to desk duty in Guam. He got the message. Stop digging. Let Rourke go. But the guilt wouldn't fade. The Air Force wanted silence. And silence, Baron realized, was all they were willing to pay for. Even with lives. 5 years later, Baron received an unmarked envelope. Inside, a single grainy photo, an aerial shot, infrared, taken the night of the incident. In the top corner, an outline, faint but undeniable. Not human. Not mechanical. Just wrong. Scribbled in pen across the back were 4 words, "They still watch us." Baron stared at it for hours. No return address. No date. No fingerprints. And as he locked his apartment door that night, he realized something deeply unsettling. He hadn't told anyone where he lived. It wasn't supposed to happen that night. No alert. No briefing. No logged threat assessment. Just a quiet click on an unmarked channel, followed by a voice no one ever identified. Scramble. 1 jet. Immediate. Within minutes, a single F-15 was taxiing down a frozen runway in Iceland. No escort, no chatter. The pilot, call sign Viper 2-3, didn't question it. You don't question it. Not in a place like that. Not when the order comes in without a name attached. But the paper trail tells a different story. 4 decades, there wasn't one. It was only after a declassification request, buried in a batch of Cold War intercept logs, that something strange emerged. A single line, timestamped 2:41 AM, reading only, unscheduled flight authorized, V2-3. No departure coordinates. No destination. No return. Just a redacted signature and an archival stamp that didn't match the rest of the file. That entry should have been insignificant. Except it wasn't. Because in that same hour, every radar station between Reykjavik and Thule registered an anomaly over the North Atlantic, an object moving at speeds no aircraft could survive. And for 8 full minutes, it flew without a transponder, without thermal signature, without origin. What followed was silence. No radio logs, no flight debrief, no black box. It was as if Viper 2-3 never took off. The flight commander on duty later told a colleague that when he tried to report the disappearance, he was locked out of the terminal mid-typing. The system shut itself down. Hard. 2 techs from Ramstein arrived the next morning, took the data core, and left before noon. The command tower's security footage for that night? Replaced. Not erased, replaced. With a looped file from 3 nights earlier. That wasn't sloppiness. That was a message. Still, rumors clung like frost. The techs on the tarmac swore the plane didn't lift in a straight arc, said it jolted upward like something yanked it by the tail. Maintenance logs show the jet had just returned from routine diagnostics, no mechanical faults, no anomalies. Yet somehow, not a single part of it was ever recovered. No oil slick, no fuselage, no locator beacon. The North Atlantic held its silence. But silence has its own gravity. Whispers began to form in the gaps the truth left behind. Of an encounter so extreme that a temporary task force was quietly assembled and then immediately disbanded. Of transcripts intercepted and buried before they ever hit the main system. One line, allegedly from an airman who handled the pilot's original gear, stuck in classified circles for years. His flight suit was back in the locker before we even knew he was gone. And that's where the paper trail ends, or pretends to. Because buried beneath the black ink and redacted codes, someone left a notation. A margin scribble, faint but legible. It reads, "Contact achieved. Suppress until further notice." Ask ChatGPT. They called it Detachment 47, though no one outside of certain classified corridors knew it by name. Hidden on the windswept coast of northern Iceland, the base didn't exist on any map. Its hangars were sunk into the rock, its radar arrays disguised as weather stations, and its airmen briefed under the harshest oaths the military could demand. Officially, their mission was simple: monitor Soviet airspace activity, intercept potential intrusions, and vanish back into the cold before Moscow could blink. But off the record, the Phantom Squadron served a different purpose. Their job wasn't just to chase Russian bombers. It was to catch the things the Soviets refused to acknowledge, objects even they couldn't identify. Most days were routine. Icy tedium wrapped in protocol. Flight drills, patrol rotations, briefings layered in secrecy. The squadron operated like a machine, efficient, detached, and unquestioning. But on January 17, 1986, something disrupted that rhythm. At 3:17 hours, Radar Officer Senior Chief Maddox noticed a return on his screen that didn't match any known signature. It was faint at first, then sharp, too sharp. The object was approaching from the north at a speed beyond Mach 3. That wasn't unusual for a satellite falling through orbit, except this one made a 90-degree turn at full velocity and continued on a horizontal path, twice. Within seconds, the entire command room went from half asleep to dead silent. Multiple radar consoles confirmed the same impossible trajectory. No heat signature. No IFF transponder. No sound barrier break. Just a solid, silent blur moving with surgical precision through a corridor of airspace that should have set off every Soviet alarm. Only, it didn't. Moscow never scrambled a response. No emergency signals were intercepted. Whatever this was, the Soviets weren't tracking it, or were pretending not to. Captain Elias Rourke, the squadron's most experienced pilot, was scrambled before command even finished the risk assessment. His F-15 was prepped and in the air in under 7 minutes. Protocol demanded at least 2 escort aircraft, but this time, Rourke flew solo. No explanation. No debate. Just a quiet nod from the base commander and a launch authorization that bypassed the usual codes. Lieutenant Baron, his wingman, protested, loudly, but was told to stand down. The words used were chillingly exact, he volunteered. "It's above your clearance." By the time Rourke reached the coordinates, the object had changed direction again, this time moving toward open ocean. He reported visual contact less than a minute later. Then the radio distortion began. At first, just static. Then echoes. As if his words were being thrown back at him a split second too late, like he was speaking into a tunnel that wasn't quite part of this world. Ground control logged everything, but no one spoke. The room was frozen. Maddox said later that something about the silence made his skin crawl, that it felt like the building itself was holding its breath. That was the last time Detachment 47 ever operated as a full squadron. Within days, several officers were rotated out. Maddox was reassigned to a weather station in Greenland. Baron was grounded and given administrative duties. And as for Rourke, he never returned. But the strangest detail wasn't his disappearance, it was the fact that no one filed a missing pilot report. Because officially, according to revised logs, there was no pilot in the air that night. And yet, one airman swore he saw Rourke's flight suit return to the gear locker, perfectly folded, hours after the mission ended, still warm to the touch. At first, they thought it was a glitch. Radar interference from a storm off the Greenland coast, maybe a miscalibration in the tracking software. But the object kept reappearing, same location, same trajectory, same impossible velocity. It wasn't behaving like anything known to aviation. There were no curves in its path, no gradual arcs. Just sharp, angular movements, perfect 90-degree turns at speeds that should have torn any aircraft apart. The air traffic controller on duty, Lieutenant Carla Reeves, marked it as an anomaly and flagged it for technical review. But as she reached for the comms to call it in, the bogey stopped. Mid-air. Instantaneous halt. No deceleration. No sonic boom. Just motion, then stillness. 3 seconds later, it vanished from radar entirely. Reeves looked at the others in the control room, expecting someone to speak, to explain, to joke, to offer a rational cause, but no one did. The silence was heavier than the data. Everyone had seen it. Everyone had felt that drop in their stomach. This wasn't a malfunction. Something was there, and it was playing with them. Then it came back. But this time, it wasn't just a blip. The signal split. One object became 2, then 3, before recombining into a single return. The system had no way to track it properly. It was as if the object existed outside the parameters the radar was built to interpret. Like it was folding around the detection net rather than moving through it. That's when Captain Rourke's voice cut through the static, low, and level. "I have visual." The room froze. Reeves stared at the comms unit, hands trembling slightly. "Say again," she asked. The reply came back slower. "Measured. I'm looking at it. Black. Triangular. No wings. No rotors. It's hovering." There was something unnatural in the tone of his voice, not fear exactly, but confusion twisted into something deeper. Rourke wasn't the type to rattle. But what he was seeing didn't make sense. It wasn't reflecting light. It was absorbing it. Even the moonlight didn't seem to touch the surface. The sky around it looked wrong, subtly bent, like the air itself was distorted. He described no exhaust, no sound, no heat trail. Just a sleek, seamless body, like it was carved from a single piece of obsidian and left to float above the Atlantic. Rourke said it didn't move like a machine. It shifted, adjusted, tilted on invisible axes. Every time he tried to circle it, it would reposition, almost like it was watching him, responding before he finished a maneuver. Then, without warning, the object accelerated. No wind-up, no build-up. It just left, straight up, vanished into the upper atmosphere in under 2 seconds. Ground control scrambled to reacquire the signal, but the sky was empty again. Rourke stayed in pursuit, rising fast, tracking the coordinates where it disappeared, but it was gone. The airspace was dead quiet. Too quiet. He radioed again. It knew I was watching it. Reeves began logging the incident as an unidentified aerial phenomenon, but her terminal crashed before she could hit save. The logs, she later discovered, were auto-scrubbed at 4 o'clock hours. Not overwritten. Deleted. As if the system had been waiting for her to type those words. Meanwhile, Rourke's telemetry began showing anomalies, altitude shifts that didn't match flight path, G-forces beyond human survivability, even though his voice remained calm. Then the second object appeared. This one didn't hover. It didn't observe. It moved directly behind Rourke's jet and matched his speed. He called it out. "It's back." "No, this one's closer." The tension in his voice had shifted. Not panic. Something colder. Distant. Reeves could hear it. Like something was breaking down, not just outside the jet, but inside it. Inside him. Then came the static. And a final, fractured sentence. "I think it's learning." Rourke tried to shake it. A roll left, then a hard bank to starboard, moves he could perform in his sleep. But every turn, every shift in speed, was mirrored perfectly by the black triangle now tailing his jet. It wasn't chasing him. It was copying him, down to the millisecond. The kind of mimicry that didn't just require sensors, it required understanding. The object didn't react like a drone. It anticipated. It moved like it knew what was coming before he did. And that's when something shifted in his voice, a hesitation none of them had ever heard before. It's mirroring us. Back in the control room, the technicians watched the telemetry with silent dread. Every movement Rourke made was logged. So were the UFOs. Identical. Down to the G-forces, the acceleration curve, the orientation. Maddox, the radar chief, whispered that the system must be feeding back on itself, that maybe the bogey was just a ghost signal. But Reeves shook her head. The latency was too perfect. Too real. This wasn't feedback. This was a response. Then, without warning, Rourke lost control. The fighter jolted into a climb he didn't initiate. Instruments flickered. Power surged, then dropped. His HUD froze mid-frame. He tapped the throttle, no response. "It's in the controls," he said, voice thinner now. "I'm not flying anymore." Ground control tried to override remotely, but their link was dead. Rourke was locked out. The jet was flying itself. No AI, no override command, no protocol that made sense. Reeves tried to re-establish comms, but the frequency warped. His voice began to distort, as if dragging through water. Snippets came through, they're watching, adjusting, then a burst of static, followed by something worse, echoes. His own words, repeated back to him out of sync, twisted and bent, like the signal itself had gone sentient. Maddox slammed the emergency transponder code to mark it as a hijack. Nothing responded. Then, a second object appeared. Slightly larger. Same shape, same unnatural black that seemed to devour starlight. It didn't hover this time, it flanked him. Reeves' monitor showed a triangle on each side of Rourke's jet, forming a slow, tightening triangle of their own. He was boxed in. "There's two now," Rourke said. "They're communicating." It wasn't a guess. He said it with certainty, like he felt it. His breathing had changed. No longer controlled. It was short now, fragmented. "I think they're studying something," he said. Then a pause. "I don't think it's the jet. I think it's me." The line crackled again. Baron, listening from the auxiliary comms room, stood up instinctively. He'd flown hundreds of hours with Rourke, but he'd never heard that kind of tone before. Detached. Not panicked, but like something was being stripped away. The third object arrived silently. It emerged not from the horizon, but directly above. No descent path. No entry on radar. It just appeared. For a brief moment, the three black triangles rotated in unison, encircling Rourke's jet in a way that made no aerodynamic sense. His aircraft began to vibrate, not mechanically, but with something deeper. A kind of resonance. He spoke one last time, and the words weren't directed at control. "They're not here for contact. They're here to replicate." Then, abruptly, he went silent. The telemetry froze. His altitude locked. Airspeed dropped to 0. The F-15 was hovering, an impossibility. No stall warning. No structural alarms. Just suspension. Like gravity had been cancelled. Maddox reached for the emergency black box retrieval protocol, but his access was denied. Unauthorized code. Reeves stared at the screen as the data stream scrambled. Coordinates shifted. The aircraft's ID transponder blinked off. Then came a final spike in the signal. Not from the jet, but from the objects. And in that moment, every light in the base dimmed, flickered, and died. The moment the lights flickered out at Detachment 47, the room held its breath. Emergency systems kicked in, but the data feed was gone. No altitude. No vitals. No Rourke. For exactly 11 seconds, everything was blank, every screen, every frequency, every response protocol dead. When the monitors came back online, the F-15 was gone. Not destroyed. Not crashed. Just erased. No descent recorded, no impact trajectory, no thermal bloom from an explosion. 1 second he was hovering, trapped between those impossible objects, and the next, the sky was empty. Reeves tried to re-establish contact. She repeated his call sign over and over, each time quieter, as if her voice might slip through some crack in reality where he could still hear it. Baron didn't say anything. He just stood behind her, jaw clenched, eyes locked on the telemetry log. He'd seen jets go down. He'd seen accidents. But this wasn't that. There was no wreckage, no oil slick, no chutes, no ELT beacon. The ocean beneath Rourke's last coordinates remained undisturbed, quiet, indifferent. And yet, something wasn't finished. Because 2 hours and 26 minutes after contact was lost, the base received a pulse, short, garbled, and unmistakable. It came through Rourke's transponder. A location ping, followed by a distorted audio burst that barely qualified as language. The signal was weak and old, like it had traveled through something dense. Something not built to carry human voices. The SOS was encrypted using a Cold War-era emergency code, one no longer taught in training. Only a handful of people on the base even recognized it. The coordinates embedded in the ping placed the signal hundreds of miles off course, deep in the North Atlantic, in a sector with no flight activity and no surface vessels registered for weeks. An unbroken stretch of water known for its depth and its silence. Command immediately locked down the feed. Reeves and Maddox were removed from their stations, separated, and told to await debriefing. Barron wasn't even spoken to. He was given leave papers and told to return stateside immediately. But he never boarded the plane. Instead, he returned to the control room under the cover of darkness, accessed the raw signal archive, and pulled the waveform from the backup tape before it could be scrubbed. What he found was worse than silence. The audio file, when cleaned and slowed, revealed fragments of Rourke's voice, choked, distorted, but unmistakably him. 3 words repeated across the span of 40 seconds. They're closing in. There was no scream, no explosion. Just that phrase. Soft. Like he wasn't talking to anyone, but trying to remind himself of something. Or warn himself. The tone wasn't panic. It was resignation. Like the thing that had taken control of his aircraft had finally reached him, not just his jet. And if what the waveform suggested was accurate, he was still alive when he said it. What happened next never made it into the logs. Because as Barron sat alone in that control room, staring at the waveform, another signal came through. A narrowband frequency the base wasn't equipped to receive. It didn't identify itself. It didn't request response. It simply broadcast coordinates, different ones. Ones that didn't point to the ocean at all, but somewhere further north, inland. Somewhere a jet shouldn't have gone. The coordinates from the signal were unmistakable, deep North Atlantic, cold, desolate, and far from any shipping lane. The kind of place even submariners avoided unless ordered. Within 12 hours of the transponder burst, a classified recovery team was mobilized out of Norfolk under a black directive. No standard mission brief. No paper trail. Just encrypted orders routed through a Department of Defense relay marked with the designation, Project Palladium, a name that hadn't surfaced in official channels since the early 70s. The team was airborne before midnight, equipped for deep-sea salvage, yet none of them were told what they were recovering. They were only told what not to say. Satellite pings from the region confirmed the presence of a single Navy vessel in the area, a guided missile destroyer retasked without notice, its transponder blacked out during the operation. Civilian satellite data later showed its signature loitering in a tight pattern over the coordinates where Rourke's signal had come through. Something was found. But before the recovery crew could offload or report back, new orders came through, immediate recall. The mission was terminated mid-recovery. Data hard drives on board were seized. All body cams wiped. And not a single member of the crew was permitted to speak about what they saw. According to one technician, a non-disclosure threat was read aloud in the hangar upon return. Not a briefing. A threat. Violation will result in permanent detainment without trial under emergency authority provisions. Still, the cracks began to form. People talk. Quietly. Carefully. Off the record. One naval engineer later admitted, off base, drunk, and visibly shaken, that they pulled something from the water. Not wreckage. Not metal. He said it looked biological. That it pulsed. He used that word specifically. Pulsed. Like it was still alive. He said they never brought it above deck. That the crane seized up mid-hoist and that whatever it was, it gave off a sound, something low, below the range of hearing, but felt in the bones. The kind of resonance that made grown men nauseous. The kind of sound you can't ever hear. There's no proof of that. No photographs. No footage. But the destroyer returned to port with a security detail not from the Navy, but from a separate branch entirely, plainclothes men who took command of the vessel before it even docked. The ship was immediately classified as in quarantine inspection, a protocol typically reserved for chemical contamination. No one was allowed off without full body scans and psychological evaluations. The ship's captain was reassigned the next day to a desk post in Utah, hundreds of miles from any coast. He has never spoken publicly about the mission. Meanwhile, back at Detachment 47, the mood had shifted. Officers were rotated out. Computers were wiped and replaced with older systems, ones without satellite uplinks. It was as if the base had been told to forget it ever had the capacity to monitor that airspace. Reeves was transferred. Maddox resigned without notice. And Baron? He vanished. No orders. No farewell. One day he was in his bunk. The next, gone. His locker was cleared. His personal effects boxed and removed by someone outside the chain of command. There was no report. But what remained, what no one could scrub, was the growing unease that something had been brought back. Something that wasn't supposed to survive. Because 2 weeks later, a low-frequency pulse was picked up by an underwater listening station in the Arctic. It matched the frequency embedded in Rourke's last transmission. And then a second ping came through, from a place no signal should have reached. Ask ChatGPT. The official report was clinical. A routine training flight. Pilot error. Jet malfunction. A tragic but explainable accident. Rourke was declared KIA, his name added to a long list of servicemen lost in the line of duty. The final log entry showed nothing unusual, no mention of radar anomalies, no record of pursuit, no evidence that anything unclassified had occurred. His flight path was adjusted post-incident to a safer, domestic route. The communications log? Replaced. And when Detachment 47 was finally decommissioned, the last thing erased was its own involvement. No one had orders. No one had questions. And no one was supposed to remember. But memory doesn't follow command structure. Especially not for the people who lived it. Especially not for a man like Richard Hale, a radar technician who had worked Detachment 47's night watch shift for over a decade. He was the one who caught the first anomaly that night. He was the one who rerouted the uplink to record Rourke's final flight path before it vanished from the system. And for years, he kept quiet. Even after early retirement. Even after his wife left him, saying he woke up with the war in his eyes. Even after the black SUVs started parking across from his house, doing nothing, just existing. Then in 2011, Hale sent a package to a civilian aviation researcher in Oslo. No return address. No note. Just a tape, marked with a call sign, a date, and one word, listen. The researcher, Lars Vinge, didn't even know what he had at first. The tape was old, the format obsolete. It took weeks to restore. But when it played, the room reportedly fell silent. No background chatter, no ambient static like most flight recordings. Just a single voice. Calm. Low. Not frightened, but different. Changed. It was Rourke. And he wasn't speaking to the tower. The voice came in faintly, distorted but intelligible. He was reciting a string of coordinates. Repeating them in intervals. Always the same. The longitude and latitude placed the location just northeast of a remote chain of Arctic islands, an uninhabited sector of sea ice where no aircraft had ever legally flown. There was no distress call, no mayday. Just that whisper. Like he was no longer speaking through equipment, but from somewhere else. Somewhere colder. Somewhere distant, but listening back. Vinge cross-checked the flight logs. The coordinates didn't match any official route. He reached out to former military contacts, asking if they'd heard of Rourke, or Project Palladium, or the detachment. Most replies were polite denials. Some were warnings. But one email stood out. It came from a throwaway address and simply said, "You found the tape. Burn it." Attached was a photograph. Grainy. Blurred. But the timestamp was clear. It was dated 3 weeks after Rourke's disappearance, and showed the back of a man boarding a military cargo plane in Nevada. Same height. Same build. Same walk. No one has been able to prove it was Rourke. The Pentagon denies the tape's authenticity. The Navy calls it an elaborate hoax. But someone scrubbed the original logs within hours of Vinge uploading the audio. His site was hacked, his backups deleted, and his access to international aviation archives was revoked without explanation. When journalists tried to follow up with Hale, they found his home abandoned. The kitchen table was still set for breakfast, the front door unlocked. But Hale himself was never seen again. Still, one thing was left behind, a scrawled message in red grease pencil across his garage wall. Coordinates. The same as the tape. Beneath them, just 4 words, he never came back. Except, a week later, another tape surfaced. Not mailed. Not leaked. Broadcast. Intermittently. Briefly. Across military frequencies long thought decommissioned. A whisper. A repeat of that same voice. Only this time, it wasn't just coordinates. It was a warning. The desert air outside Tonopah was dry and motionless, the kind of silence that settles only where too many secrets have been buried too long. It was 2004 when the report came in, filed casually, almost dismissed. A defense contractor, waiting for clearance at a restricted airfield, spotted someone stepping onto the rear ramp of a military cargo plane. Not unusual, except for one detail. He recognized the face. From an old personnel file he'd archived over a decade earlier. The man was lean, mid-30s at most, but the ID he recalled belonged to a pilot declared dead in 1986. A man named Rourke. At first, no one believed him. Memories bend, faces blur. But the contractor had worked avionics for 20 years and had been stationed at the same base where Rourke flew out of. He said he'd eaten lunch 2 tables away from the guy, heard his voice in passing, one of those small, forgettable encounters that suddenly become unforgettable. And the man he saw in Nevada? Same gait, same sharp jaw, same eyes, cold, focused, like they were still locked on a mission. But younger. Far too young. Security footage was requested. Denied. FAA flight logs for that cargo plane were sealed. The tail number. Not listed in any civilian registry. Still, the contractor persisted. He returned to the hangar the next day, hoping to spot him again. What he found instead was a slip of yellow paper tucked under his windshield wiper. No fingerprint residue. No handwriting match. Just 8 words scribbled with perfect precision. They showed me the dark side of the moon. He didn't sleep for 2 days after that. The phrase echoed through every conversation he tried to have, every moment of silence he tried to escape. He hadn't told anyone the specifics of what he saw. So who knew? Who understood enough to leave that message? He took a leave of absence, later citing personal deterioration. The official report says he never returned to the airfield. But years later, his son found a spiral notebook hidden in a vent behind the garage. It was filled with numbers, frequencies, time stamps, and pages of scrambled notes, all circling around a single idea: temporal isolation. That same year, multiple long-range radar stations in the Arctic began picking up brief, intermittent signals, identical in pattern to Rourke's final transmission. Analysts were told to disregard them as solar interference. But buried inside one of those bursts was a distorted fragment that, when reversed and cleaned, revealed a single sentence: "I saw myself watching me." It doesn't make sense. It's not supposed to. Unless you believe what some now do, that what returned in 2004 wasn't entirely human. Or maybe it was, but not from here. Not from now. Maybe Rourke never died. Maybe he was taken, then brought back when they were finished with him. Whatever they are. And maybe, just maybe, they sent him ahead of something else. Something we haven't yet seen. Because 2 weeks after the Nevada sighting, a civilian weather balloon over Wyoming captured an anomaly at 80,000 feet. A triangular shadow, silent and drifting, not under power, but under purpose. Military dismissed it, classified it, buried it. But one technician swore he saw it on infrared, just for a moment. And inside that shadow, something moved. The Pentagon's official line was simple: there was no Rourke, no incident, and no anomaly. The documents were either sealed, sanitized, or never existed to begin with. Every inquiry met the same dead end: unacknowledged units, retired designations, and an unbroken wall of silence. But behind that silence, something else lingered. A question no one in authority dared ask out loud. If something had the power to commandeer a jet mid-flight, override military systems, mimic human thought, then what else had it taken, and why? Because Rourke came back, but he wasn't the same. The man people saw stepping onto that Nevada tarmac looked like him, sounded like him, moved like him, but there was something hollow in the presence. No records of where he had been. No recollection of those who once served with him. And no explanation of how he appeared decades younger than the day he disappeared. The kind of mystery that doesn't just challenge timelines, it breaks them. And maybe that was the point. Maybe he didn't come back as a man at all, but as a message. If they can rewrite a flight log, erase a pilot's name from every active duty record, and black out satellites over a 300-mile stretch of ocean in under an hour, then what else have they deleted? What moments in history never happened, because they were unwritten before they began? The whisper of a voice on an unauthorized tape. The sudden resignation of every member of an entire radar detachment. The pulsating thing recovered from beneath Arctic waters, sealed in steel and shipped inland, destination unknown. They covered it all. Efficiently. Without noise. As if the silence itself was part of the protocol. But not everything stays buried. Rourke's reappearance cracked something open. A tremor beneath the surface. Since then, unconfirmed sightings have ticked upward. Strange aircraft in remote skies, brief pulses of sound beneath the sea, and infrared readings that vanish before they can be locked. Pilots speak less freely now. Not because of policy, but fear. Fear that speaking truth invites attention. Not from enemies, but from whatever it was that pulled Rourke out of the sky, and returned him unfinished. A handful of signals, disjointed, erratic, continue to broadcast from beyond known orbit. One contained an English phrase, distorted but legible. It didn't request help. It didn't announce identity. It simply asked, "Do you remember what I was before?" As if the voice itself had lost track, or was never supposed to remember. A question like that doesn't come from a man. It comes from something that had to become one. Whatever found Rourke, it didn't just take him. It learned him. And when it sent him back, it made sure we knew. The message wasn't in his words, it was in his absence. The way everything around his name collapsed like scaffolding without a frame. As if the deeper you searched, the more you realized the files didn't vanish, they were never meant to exist. Like his story wasn't redacted, but overwritten. So we're left with the echo. The sense that something ancient and precise has been watching us longer than we've been watching the skies. Something that doesn't invade with force, but with memory. With silence. With mirrors. The Pentagon can deny it. The records can be erased. But somewhere out there, beneath the ice or beyond the moon, a piece of him is still repeating the last thing he tried to say. And if you listen carefully, really listen, you'll hear what was taken wasn't just a pilot. It was the proof that we're no longer the ones writing our history. We're only reading the version they left behind.